Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of the Malayan Empire, or at least parts of it. We're continuing with Stonewielder, chapters 5 and 6, so we are crossing from the sea to the land. And I apologize for the last video being late. My internet's been down. I've been using mobile data to upload videos, which takes forever. And it's late in the evening. I just carried up a bunch of boxes of CDs that arrived today, so if you want some really cool epic metal from Texas, I do now have Rygar albums to sell on there. Yeah, on the label page, basically. Anyway, enough of that. Let's get started with this, because I have another meeting in, I don't know, 40 minutes, I guess. So maybe this will be shorter than the last two times. Let's wait and see. Well, cheers. So yeah, we've come to a more military part of the whole book, with chapters 5 and 6, especially chapter 5, which is largely about breaking the Marish Sea blockade, and has something we rarely see in fantasy novels, that being a large-scale naval battle. I mean, I know there's some of them in Life Ship Traders, but they're not like this kind of large-scale military kind of naval engagement. It's more like piracy stuff. And beyond that, well, you need to go through your like Master and Commander or Hornblower or whatever kind of books to get large-scale naval battles. And I've said it before, where Steven Erikson is very good when it comes to describing horses and everything with riding and stuff, Cam Asselmont is a master of describing shipboard stuff. He knows his sailing, he knows his ships, and having a large-scale naval battle is basically, he can shine through and through that one. That's chapter 5, that is almost completely just that, just naval battles. With, a bit here and there what's going on in Corel or in that other part of that island, basically, with Bakun, but it's not much with Bakun yet. So we mostly focus on that battle. And it's difficult to talk much about like a naval battle, apart from saying how brilliant it is. So I want to focus on some of the other stuff that's going on during that battle. Mostly the High Mage, whose name I keep forgetting. I mean, something Fedalas? Not really. I promise I'll learn it by tomorrow, hopefully. What is important here is that she is obviously from Mare, and now this is an interesting thing that I've said before. Like, we have these, like, how names show up, and like to have the country that is like most tightly knit to the sea being Mare, which is very close to both the German word for ocean and like in sound, and obviously motherfucker. Anyway, and at the same time also close to the Latin one of mare and whatnot is pretty cool, and may just be part of why they chose that name. I have no idea. But what it does is it makes it easy for us to connect those things when we read them. Anyway, what we need to know is obviously that the country of Corel and Fist being under the power of the lady, or blessed lady, who whatever she may be, is, well, it's not a good thing. And for someone who comes from there, I feel this is what Esselmont does really well in these two chapters, is when we see how, for someone who grew up with both the knowledge of, like, the evil that is going on in Corel, but also the knowledge and the absolute certainty of Mare and the Maries, galleys, and like that sea power being invincible. to see like the outside world intrude in such a violent way as we see here with the Watson, with the Blue Moranth just burning down all those holy, basically not holy but sanctified ships and everything. That is just Aslan handles that really well. That idea of how that destroys one's personal convictions or makes that you know question one's personal convictions and ideals. And it's like, yeah, well, because there's a cost to everything, and we've seen that before in like one of the first chapters when Bakun faces that old former sister Charity, and she's like, that question of what is evil and what is good, how we weigh evil and good in like those outcomes of our actions. A lot of people died here, and it is still for a good cause. But the question is like, at what point do you cross that line from good intentions to evil outcome? At what point do you kind of cross that? If you think of like evil and good weighing it, canceling each other out, or being like on the scales of whatever kind of way all these ideas of justice that we have in our faith, in our like mythologies and whatnot. And the question there is, at what point do they cancel each other out? Is destroying the entirety of Mare still a price that is like not too high to pay to also free Corel of the influence of the lady? And that is like a very interesting thing, because what we see here as well is we have we have the Storm Guard. And the Storm Guard, while being, cruel as fuck, while using all these slaves, all these prisoners to man the wall and fight at the wall, people like, what's the Lord Marshal, Lord Protector of the Wall, Hyams, and Wall Marshal Quinns, and whatever those people are, they are honorable men. They are honest. They truly believe that they're doing good. And it's important that we have those people, because on the one hand we have the abbot and those in the hinterlands that serve our Blessed Lady. There's obviously corruption going on there. They're terrible people, which feeds into those stereotypes that we have. And we spoke about that yesterday, those stereotypes we have about how religion is, corrupt from the inside, committing all these terrible crimes and whatnot, and just putting up the face of holiness. And it's easy to watch, to view religion that way, organized religion that way. It's very, very easy, because in our world we have a lot of examples of, priests preaching water and drinking wine, so to speak, or even more like in recent years, like recent months, when you look at, I don't know, all the revelations about the Catholic Church in Canada, or before that in Ireland, or in Germany, wherever, you have all these ideas of sexual assault and all these terrible things against the priests, for example, with the Catholic Church. And obviously you also have the similar things going on in other churches, but see, it's very easy to fall into that idea. But what we see on the other side with the Storm Guard is that while they still technically serve someone who is evil, I assume, at this point, there can be, honor and goodness in those people. I mean, they're hard, obviously, because they're still warriors and doing cruel things, but they truly believe that they are saving either all of humanity, or at least everyone living in those countries, in that countryside, from a death by storm rider and water and whatnot. So they're doing a very good, not very good, but they're certainly doing some good. So are those still evil? Are they still evil or not? It's one of those questions that Stonewielder asks perpetually. Is like, are all of these people good or evil? So there's that. That keeps on, going through the entirety of the book, very much so far, at least. Now, another thing um, that I feel is very interesting is the sea people. So we have the group of Blues and Shell and Fingers and whatever the fourth guy is. I keep forgetting his name. Those Crimson Guard people that are obviously on their way to save Iron Bars, and however many people of his group are still alive. And they run into the sea people. And I appreciate a lot of the things that are going on about the sea people here. Because, and I need to be careful with language here, and I probably don't know all the proper words here because, so if I use words that can be construed as insulting, it's just my lack of vocabulary. My point is, we have in a lot of fantasy books, whether it is The Wheel of Time, yes, I've read the first novel, and we meet those people there as already. There's a lot of other books like that. Technically, even the, what I called Idimaru, I think, in the Kingkiller Chronicles, we have a lot of depictions of overtly romantic depictions of what people used to call gypsies, and I'm trying to not use that word because it's demeaning and has all kinds of connotations that we don't want here. But the point is, like, having a group of, and a tightly knit group of, like, family, clan, whatever, that is viewed from the outside world as less than human, either romanticized to all fucking hell, as you see in The Eye of the World, for example, or just demeaned and discriminated against, as you see in the real world, with the Romani people, for example, in Eastern and Central Europe, and technically also in Germany, or the travelers in the British Isles, whom I have like very little idea about because I'm not from there. But you have all these. Either you romanticize them, having all their cards and dancing around the fire and having a secret knowledge, and it's terrible, or you just call them thieves and liars and whatnot, which is also terrible. So having a group that fulfills part of those aspects in a society, but actually depicting them in a, dare I say, more realistic way? Probably more realistic, because you see on the one hand the depredations they fall victim to when you have the Juston warships just taking some of their people. On the other hand, you have the Shell's perspective as an outsider to that group, who thinks they are dirty, uncivilized, whatever, which is once again a perspective that a lot of people have towards these kinds of people, in a way. The way I felt it was handled in this book is just really cool, because you go away from the stereotype of them using, large wagons and traveling all over the over the countryside, and put them into boats, which, why the fuck not? Then moving from place to place until they get kicked out, which is once again exactly that kind of a well, not even stereotype, but not sadly realistic for a long time, how people of Sinti or Romani or whatever descent were treated in especially Europe. So having a sort of realistic seeming depiction of those people, how they navigate as sort of that part of society that no one talks to, but that everyone talks about or makes pictures about, makes their own images and whatnot about. I felt is important to do. It may be just easier to do it without by transferring them into a seafaring situation. But the principles remain the same, so I really appreciate the way that was done, because he doesn't shy away from showing that their existence is not just all, it's not black and white, it's not all romantic dancing around fires, but it's also not all, terrible and miserable. It's just if you live in these basic living conditions, civilized, so-called civilized people may just find that, well, have difficulties understanding that, I guess, or appreciating why you live under certain conditions. So yeah, having that in there, I felt was a really cool way to do it because we both have like Osu is his name, I think, inside perspective, and then here we have the outside perspective of mostly Shell at this point. Um, there's also that girl, that young woman, I should say, Mina. I keep forgetting her name. We're gonna talk about her tomorrow because I kind of seem to remember there was something happening in the future. But yeah, we'll got to talk about that, I guess, later on. Anyway, just felt that like the whole way this was described was really cool, especially when it comes to the idea that one of their like younger men is just taken and then he just jumps off board and swims back to the rest, because everyone knows that they love freedom so much that they'd rather die than be prisoners. So no one even considers that they just like actually find ways to survive the whole thing and be picked up by their family again. So we even see how they play or like use those stereotypes and the ignorance of those other groups that are discriminating against them. So yeah, I felt that was just really well done. One of those small bits and pieces that we see in the Malazan world in general, when we see how stereotypes and conventions both of our world and fantasy literature are used and subverted and so forth to actually teach us, or maybe just get us thinking about how we personally live our lives and treat with other people. All right, let's continue and talk about other stuff that is important, I think. Um, invaders, going native, is obviously one of those really big questions in this book. It's like, does any group of people have a right to a country? Is there any like way to do that? And obviously, we have discussions of the sort in, say, Carcanas. It shows up again and again in the Malazan world because it's one of those things that also shows up in our world. Now, obviously, you have the people, the possibly original inhabitants of Fist and Corel, who seem to be Tarthanol descendants, but certainly are people that, you know, yeah, like the first people that lived there. Then you have like the first group of invaders, then you have the Malazans going in there, then going native, and now you have another group of Malazans attacking the place again. And still, all of those people feel that it is their right to defend the land against the Storm Riders, who also seem to have some sort of claim on the place. So I feel what we can learn from this and take from this is that our claims in our world, that this is our land, this is like that idea of having a right to a specific part of like land, is always an illusion, because there was always someone before us there that we or our ancestors took it from. So we have no more right to that than anyone else. The question then obviously is like, how do you deal with that? When someone else wants your life, do you just your world, your country, your place? Do you just give it up? Do you find a compromise? What do you do? My response would obviously be, yeah, find room for them, because that's how we should deal with stuff like refugees, for example. And that's a question for a different day, I guess. I'm just read something in the news that made me really angry on the topic. Anyway, but what I wanted to look at is exactly that with the Malazans, or the Sixth Army, Usu and the Overlord, whose name I keep forgetting because it only gets mentioned from time to time, and the other guy, his representative on that. When Usu is on the army with Boron, the Black Moranth commander, how some of them have gone completely native in adopting the country's identity, in adopting the country's very, very specific religion, and it becomes more and more obvious, obviously, throughout this these chapters, that, you know, once again, we're not talking about a very divine person here. We're talking about some form of entity that has an ongoing fight, ongoing conflict with the Queen of Dreams. Now, I'm personally a huge fan of the Queen of Dreams in a lot of ways, and at this point, if you followed all these videos and read Carcanas and whatnot, you kind of know more about her. This, I guess, but still, it's interesting to see her hand in a lot of these things, I guess. Um, Especially when it's that bit of like the Queen of Dreams having something to do here that ties what is going on Corel together with Kiskas and, let's just call him Leoman at this point. Um, Search for Teishren, because once again that search is supported by the Queen of Dreams. So what game does she play? Because when we look at it in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, she doesn't show up that much. It's like, and we get very little explanation of like where she stands in the grand scheme of things, in the conflict between, you know, the crippled god and others. We don't see much of her there. So it's interesting to see her take a more active hand in things. Another thing that we see here, obviously, is with that emissary or ambassador or whatever his name is in the army with Boron and Usu. The old problem of the converted person, right? It's like not like unknown at this point. I guess most of you know this. Like if someone converts to a religion, they usually are way more zealous about it than people that are born into a specific faith, because you constantly feel that you need to show your devotion and whatnot because you never fully accept it and whatnot. That's sort of like the psychology, like the armchair psychology behind it, I guess. But my point is that we see it here again with that guy constantly going off on Usu, who obviously is a terrible person because he uses human sacrifice to power his magic. Which seems to be the same thing the Church of the Lady is doing, I guess. Well, we'll see where all of that is ending, but we see once again how you have another of those patterns that we find in military fantasy in the Malazan world so often, that being that the aristocracy, whether it's religious aristocracy or economic aristocracy, as we saw in Return of the Crimson Guard, for example, with the city council in Li Hang. What we see there is that they basically, by trying to rule military, like make military decisions without any training and experience, basically doom their soldiers. As I said, this is I would almost call it a trope in military fantasy and military sci-fi at this point, that you're like the people in command, like absolute command, are always incompetent or almost always incompetent, and ruin it for the soldier on the ground. Now, obviously that doesn't go for like the old school like Malazan commanders, like, you know, Dasem, Whiskey Jack, Dujak, and here Greymane. We're going to talk about Greymane and what's his name, Kyle, in a second. But we see that here once again, that the failures of the Rulian army against the Malazan troop that we have seen so far is mostly due to really dumb tactical decisions made by people who are not qualified to make those decisions, except by, you know, right of birth or other, like, not by skill, basically. And this is something that we have seen in the Malazan world in general, and we come back to that in a second. It's like the idea is the Malazan world is certainly one that is a meritocratic, right? We've spoken about that before. In the ideal parts of the Malazan army, when it works, it is people are in, you know, promoted that are the most capable. It's skill that is rewarded. It's not rank, or it's not, you know, wealth, birth, or anything like that. It is pure skill. And we see that borne out again and again in different parts of the Malazan world, that those most skilled will usually have success unless something really overwhelming stands against them, or they are hampered by people who are less skilled above them. It's just one of those things that are like basic principles of the Malasan world, and we'll see this here again. Yeah, we see it here again, basically, which obviously also ties into the fact that we have, like, at least on paper, sort of gender parity in all these things. Because yes, there's no reason why gender should make you less. Your gender should make you less or more qualified for a specific thing. That's not how that works, and it obviously is, at least both Cam Esselmont and Steven Erikson try to present the world like that. Now, there's obviously still like no like 50-50 parity in like viewpoint characters, but when you look overall at soldiers, for example, they seem to be fairly even, like, in numbers between different genders. So that's just like part of that idea that the entire universe, the Malasan universe, is at its heart, in most cases, a meritocratic one that is based on skill and not on any other like ideals. Now let's check in quick with Bakun, who is obviously, now that the secular powers have withdrawn, the religious power has basically taken over. The country is basically a theocracy, and they try to suborn him into their system, make him sign make him sign rulings and so forth, and condemn Ibshank, the priest, who is now the prophet, to death. And he doesn't do it because he's a man of principles. Yeah. Doesn't work for him. He gets put into prison and then breaks out. And what we see here, once again, is there's two things going on with Bakun. Why, right? One of them is the honest cop, or, well, assessor, but the honest law enforcement person that is actually trying to do justice, coming up against all the corruption in the world, and realizing that maybe the system they are working in has been flawed from the beginning. That's the one side of it. But the other part, and this is what makes it so good, I feel, is that through questioning this and coming up against what's the guard guy, Carrion, I keep forgetting his name. Anyway, the guard captain, and now Ibshank and Manask, and later on the two guards that are supposed to help him. Bakun slowly learns how narrow his worldview was, which is sort of the same thing we saw in the last novel in Return of the Crimson Guard with the Italian princess. What's her name? Elil? I think Elil was her name. Alil as a soldier, anyway. That girl, who also comes up with like all these noble ideas in the beginning, and then realizes that the real world is different. And this is once again one of those principles that we see in the Malasan world. It is not about ideology. It is not about theory. It is very much about keeping an open mind and having a realistic view of the world. You still keep your principles, right? Empathy, compassion, justice, where it works. All these you still keep, but you are aware. You keep them despite, or not despite, but you keep them, but you are aware when to, where to bend them according to the world. It's not like you start with your theory and then you go out and make the world, and change the world so it works within your thought, within your system of thought. No, you look at the world and then you build your system of thought and morality around that. That's how that should work. And we see Bakun slowly learning that, because he came at it from the other side. Like, he had a very narrow view of the world, of justice and whatnot. Now he's confronted with the fact that maybe doesn't work that way. Anyway, we are now obviously aware that it is the abbot and the Church of Our Blessed Lady that does terrible things, which may or may not be human sacrifice, and we'll see where all that goes. The other part there is once again that with Ipshank and Manask and those two guardsmen whose names I've already forgotten again, in a otherwise rather dark novel, we have here once again humor, like really funny conversations. It's usually like two people, the whole buddy comedy kind of thing is very strong with in this one, and it, Esselmont does it really well. It's just fun to read that conversation when they drink his booze and he just like runs circles around Bakun, who's just too stuck up to realize it, basically. So I really, really appreciated that bit. That was a lot of fun to read. Yeah. On the other hand, we have, like, the one that is still left to talk about is Ivana, obviously, who is falling back more and more into the role of a military commander, all in the name of keeping the kids safe, basically, and learning more and more about what the Army of Reform is trying to do. And is now also the chosen heir to the priestess of Decemberate. And I promise you this, we'll come back to the religious part of the whole story later on. I just don't have time today, I feel. So it's interesting to see him slowly realizing that there is the cult of Ivana, which once again, we have like that idea where like worship springs up from. When you have people that live an exemplary life, other people start to worship them, and we have that similar things going on, obviously, with like our like media star and whatnot culture. It rarely goes all over into like full on religion, but the mechanisms are similar, I would say. So we'll see where that will go with Ivana in the nearest future. And yeah, what else? Kiska and Leoman do Kiska and Leoman stuff in Shadow, fighting Hounds of Shadows, meeting demons that flee because there is chaos eating up the world, and they meet someone who I am almost certain is Iskarel Pust. At least he behaves like that, including the hair pulling. So there's that, which leaves us, the absurdist humor and like dragging a dead fish behind him and so forth. That's just cool. We'll see where all that will be going in the near future. I assume tomorrow we'll learn more about it. Yeah. As I said, lots of action this time around. A fantastic sea battle, probably the best I've ever read. Another like a land battle. We see that Kyle's sword is super powerful, but we kind of knew that because he was given to him by Osirk, which, is pretty fucking good. Yeah. I guess I'll talk to you tomorrow about more of this. And until then, have a great Thursday.